Good day, fellow European investors. Buongiorno, guten tag, guten morgen, dobar dan. On Sunday, we published this video discussing Europe, the risks, what's going on, and also mentioning the Italian debt crisis as an example. And we didn't have to wait, and on Wednesday, the ECB had a crisis meeting because of the Italian debt crisis. Or maybe someone important is watching our videos, or it's just a coincidence, but okay, just a joke. Nevertheless, they had an emergency meeting because Italian yields have surged above 4%, which is wreaking havoc in the European markets, and then they immediately had to meet. The problem is that, as we discussed in the other video, Italy's current borrowing costs are at 2%, just a bit above Germany's borrowing costs. But as turmoil hits, we see the spread against Germany going higher, and Italian bonds have passed 4% for a while before the ECB intervened, and then that really changes the situation because of the following. Current interest payments for Italy from the yearly budget are around 85 billion euros, 82 billion euros, so 80 billion euros on 3 trillion euros in debt. That's an average interest rate of 2%. If that changes to 6%, the interest payment triples and completely destroys the country because of huge deficits. And I call this a Ponzi scheme in my video because when you are borrowing new money to pay interest on your loans, that is the pure definition on the Ponzi scheme. You have this video in the link in the description below. I'll try to put it also in the card here if I remember. So check that video out to explain the fundamentals. But let's now discuss what's going on, why it is such an issue, and how important it is for us poor Europeans. So let's look at what the ECB did. So ad hoc meeting, really scary, and what they say, they pledged to act against resurgent fragmentation risks. The pandemic has left lasting vulnerabilities in the euro area, and they have to act for the normalization of our monetary policy across jurisdictions. Now, let's discuss this vulnerability. If we look at the ECB balance sheet, it was below 1 trillion euros for a few years, and then they started increasing it. Of course, when the pandemic came, really doubled it. And now it's easy to say, okay, pandemic is the culprit for everything. But if you look at this, the balance sheet, then you can see that issues have been mounting for more than a decade now. And the pandemic is just one outside shock that comes, and there will be other outside shocks. So easy for politicians to say, pandemic, but it's not just a pandemic, it's the structure, my friends, and they will never admit that. Nevertheless, they decided that they will apply flexibility in reinvesting redemptions, so they will do whatever it takes. They will print as much as needed to keep the situation stable, and their condition is to be able to deliver on its price stability mandate that they will not reach, they have never reached. Never any central bank has managed to do that over short periods of time. Volcker a little bit, but that was painful. So that's a different story, but they now somehow will manage. So those are fairy tales. We have to understand that those are just politicians acting. This ad hoc meeting is to stabilize. Here we are, we will do whatever it takes. Just don't let the markets get crazy, because then we are all toasted. That's the only reason for the meeting. Just calm a little bit the markets if they can. The problem is that once they lose control, it's over. And this is a very important chart. You can see here what the European Union brought to Italy. This is the spread between Italian interest rate, the red, and the German. So you can see that over the years, early 90s, it was 7 percentage points. Then Italy managed to enter the Eurozone, and then of course parity, we are all together, Europe. But over the last years, the market and investors started to understand it's not that simple, it's not that easy, and now, especially now, that difference and that parity has exploded as Italian bonds went to 4% and Germans just a little bit higher. Why is this so important? 4% interest payment over 7 years, so it will go slowly from 80 billion for Italy higher, but that's not the main message. The main message is liquidity in the market and buyers for those bonds. This is a nice tweet from Mr. Barry, and he is telling us how, this is just an example, inflation index so awful that it changed the bond markets, and the weakest sector broke. In bond jargon, MBS, mortgage-backed securities, went no bid. No buyers from MBSs. Italy's bond went no bid. No buyers except for the ECB. When there are no buyers, you cannot refinance your debt. So, okay, interest rates, that's one step. That's the cost of the interest rate. But if there are no buyers, no bid, then happens what has happened this week, and that is a systemic shock and can really shock the complete system. And if that happens, then Europe is toasted, and that's very, very ugly. And that's why the ECB is just trying to kick the can down the road. There is no solution for this. Because there were no bids, the risks are constantly mounting. Because if you look at this, the ECB interest rates, those are zero. And even if they increase them by 1 percentage point, it's still nothing compared to inflation, because their target is 2%, but real inflation is 8, 9, even higher, depends on how you measure it. And now, if you have inflation at 10% and your interest rate at 0, that's a real interest rate of minus 10%. That's the current European rate, which is extremely stimulative to everything. And that's why you have inflation. To keep parity, interest rates should be now at 10%, but that would destroy the whole system. That's the vulnerability, not pandemics, not this. The system is simply vulnerable. That's it. And they cannot admit it because that would shock the system. So they are trying to manage it somehow, trying to do something, some magic. We will see how long will it last. That's the only issue here. And then there are some other examples that will trickle down to the whole of Europe. Austrians, because of the terrible situation there, poor Austrians will get 1,000 euro handouts to quash inflation discontent. Nehammer said, it's clear these are extraordinarily difficult times. We are giving people back the money that inflation took away. So poor Austrians are getting 1,000 euros, and also poor Nehammer, his ratings are going down, so he is now giving money to Austrians to push his rating higher. What are Austrians doing as they come from the Mediterranean? They're all flocking to the Mediterranean because of the terrible situation in Austria. It's better to go into a hotel in Croatia than to stay at home in Austria. That's the situation. And if we look at the statistics from May, Austrians have been the second after Germans that visited Croatia in May. So really, really bad situation for Austrians, and they all have to escape Austria because of the Scheisse going on there. It's terrible, and that therefore better to go to Croatia, rent something out, and live on lower prices. Yes, and now with the 1,000 euro, they will not be able to go to Croatia, not because of the difficult situation and the saving, because everything is booked. The complete land is on the sea enjoying the money, and that is, yes, as Nehammer said, a very, very shicey situation. And then other countries will want the same. If Austrians get 1,000 euros, why don't Italians get 3,000 euros? I mean, a Ferrari costs much more than Porsche. And then Draghi's advisor said Lagarde is making a mistake in rising rates. Now, whether it is a mistake or not, okay, but what he's saying is risks damaging private consumptions. Of course it will damage private consumption, because that's the only way to lower inflation and will reduce private demand, and it will happen over a few months. And that's the only way you can lower inflation. Reduce spending, you idiot. And of course, God forbid we don't spend less. And if Austria is printing, why don't we get money to Italians? The summer is coming, the new Gucci bags, everything, the new bikinis are out. Why don't we all get 5,000 euros to buy them? And that's the mantra now in the European Union. And the insanity here is that they think it can all be managed, it can all be printed, and the experiment has been going on for the last 15 years, as we have seen in the balance sheet, and at some point the party will be over. The party will come back to reality, because interest rates can go lower. Money, at some point, you can't print that much more. There are limits to these tools, and we are starting to see the limits now with the game changer inflation. And as Michael Burry says, as I said in 2008, it's like watching a plane crash. It hurts, it's not fun, and I'm not smiling. So we shouldn't smile, we should worry, but what can we do? Because after all, it's all about productivity, education, growth, quality, etc., etc. Not about money printing. Money printing pushes you up for a moment, but then pushes you down when that has to be reverted. As Ray Dalio said, human productivity is the most important force in causing the world's total wealth. Power and living standards to rise over time. If you give Austrians 1,000 euros and they go and enjoy the summer in Croatia because it's really beautiful, the problem is, but the answer is that they're going to print to oblivion because everyone wants their 1,000, 10,000 euros. Why not give every European a nice car? That would help the industry. Hyperinflation, Europe, pain. There is no outlook. If there is hyperinflation, pain. If there is austerity, there is pain. There is no way politicians pick austerity. We have seen from Nehammer, and we'll see in the future more. This leads to no bid on bonds from the real market, thus ECB, thus even more weakening the euro, and the trend is pretty clear. So maybe there will be solutions. Let's stay positive. Let's really enjoy this summer. But from a money perspective, from a fundamental perspective, as we discussed in the video, it's time to start to really diversify away from the Eurozone and look for real assets, look for quality. We'll discuss that more over time. But for now, with what our politicians are doing, the only answer is that we might go as the Austrians.